Joseph of Arimathea, a righteous member of the council who had not consented to this deed, obtained permission from Pontius Pilate to lay Jesus' body in a tomb before the Sabbath commenced at sundown.
Dr. Dale C. Allison Jr., I was reading your book and been really talking about this guy, Joseph of Arimathea, a lot. And Mark seems to be, according to scholarship, the earliest gospel that we have. And this figure comes in and asks for the body of Jesus and buries Jesus, or puts him in this tomb. And I find it ironic, that he's this Sanhedrin. So there's people who go, he was an enemy of the movement probably, or he might have been a friend of the movement, which later develops, we see in the Gospels later, with Nicodemus, even in John, and that's an interesting one. But one of the things that really gets me puzzled is, and I'm just going to throw one example out there, is the name Arimathea. They say that there was no town named Arimathea. So how's he Joseph from this place that wasn't called that? And so some people say it's like a play on the word best disciple town. And there's also this interesting thing I'd throw out there to you as kind of like it's a parable. They say Mark's like a parable, whereas Mark has the father of Jesus and Mary, his mother, which are supposed to bury him. But instead you have this woman, Mary, and this Joseph. Now, I don't know if that's overstretching the parallel of something there.
Yes.
But yes, tell us about Joseph of Arimathea.
Well, I think so. So one of the things I do in my book is I show how easy it is to draw connections between texts that are not connected. I do that at two different points. And the truth is, if you set out with two different texts to draw connections, you almost always can find connections. And sometimes you can find astounding connections that have to be nothing other than coincidence. Now, you're right. Nobody knows where Arimathea was. But I'm not an expert here. But the question would be, are there names, other names of towns in Palestine at that time whose location we do not know or whose identity we do not know? And I know the answer to that is yes. I do not know how many of them. You'd have to talk to some archaeologist who's a specialist. But it doesn't trouble me to say, to think that there was a small town and that we've lost it. Okay, that it's been lost to time. But here's how I think it works with Joseph of Arimathea. It's not that the account, you don't usually start with the account itself and say, well, I see a problem here. What you usually do is you start with the notion that crucifixion victims were typically dishonored and that you left them up on their crosses or you threw them in a pile, but you did not bury them. You certainly didn't give them an honorable burial. So my response to that is yes, it appears that that was the case, but it also appears to me to be the case that Israel was an exception to the usual Roman practice because Josephus says so. Josephus says at one point in the Antiquities that the Jews, because of a passage in Deuteronomy, you don't let a body stay up overnight, that they typically did in fact bury corpses.
Dead or not? I mean, criminal or not.
Yeah, they buried whomever they could, all right? And the notion is that the Romans acquiesced to some Jewish customs, and this was probably one they acquiesced to. The archaeological proof that this must have happened at least sometime is that we have a skeleton, as you probably know, from before 70. It was found in an ossuary. The name is Jonathan, and the archaeologists say this is pre-70. You can go see the poor guy. He's in the Israel Museum behind a little glass case. And the reason we know he's crucified is because his legs are together and there's a nail going through them into a piece of wood. And the problem is that they apparently nailed his feet together into the cross, into the wood, into a knot, and they couldn't get it out. So they just cut the wood. But the thing is this is a person who's crucified. That means the Romans must have crucified him because the Jews didn't have that ability pre-70. It means that he was buried and received an honorable burial. So this is proof. Now, the usual retort to this, I think John Dominic Crossan makes this at one point. He says, well, this is the only example of this, so surely it wasn't very common. My response to that is if you talk to burial experts, and I did this a couple of years ago, I asked about corpses from the time of Jesus in and around Jerusalem. And she said, there just aren't any. They've all disappeared. I said, where did they go? What happened to them? She said, I don't know. She said, it's a really interesting question, but we just don't have that many skeletons here.
In an ossuary, right.
Oh, no, just any skeletons, period, around in caves or whatever. And so the fact that we have one crucifixion victim who was buried seems to me, when taken with the Josephus statement, to make it likely that the Gospels are not running roughshod over history at this point. So once you don't start with that point, the question is, well, what's objectionable to the Gospel account? And I don't think you can do anything, as I said, with the name Arimathea, but it does look like this is a puzzling passage. And you can, as I show in the book, see that Matthew and Luke and John seem to be improving the story in Mark. They were a little confused by this, especially by how could a member of the council have done this, right? And I don't have the answer for that. Maybe he was in charge of the official burial thing, and they decided, and by the way, I don't know what it means. Joseph buried him. It doesn't mean Joseph had some servants and said, go take care of this and do that and do that. I don't think we have, I did my best, but we don't have answers to these sorts of questions. We don't know what the motive is. I don't believe Matthew when he says he's a disciple. I think that's Matthew looking at text and saying, this doesn't make any sense. I think Mark is saying he's a member of the Sanhedrin. How plausible is this? He must have been a secret disciple. And then that gets picked up in John, and John works with it. I can't add this to what I just said, and this occurred to me just a few years ago, and I don't think anyone had thought of it before, so maybe I actually have a new thought here. But if Joseph of Arimathea is an historical figure, right? Mm-hmm. And if he was known as Joseph of Arimathea, it means he couldn't have been there very long. I mean, once you move to a place, it's only for a certain short period of time that you keep the of Arimathea. If you're third generation, you're not Joseph of Arimathea. And it struck me that there's this note in Matthew and John, which I've always, and in Luke too, I guess, that I've always just thought was legendary and a sort of upgrade, where it says the tomb was new or nobody had ever been put in it before. But I thought, if this guy, Joseph, is from Arimathea, that means he's only come onto the scene recently. And if he really does have a family tomb, or he's built a tomb, it's not going to have the ancestors in it. I mean, do you see my point?
Yeah.
I mean, if he's just arrived...
It fits with the criteria.
It actually sort of fits. And so I don't say in my book that I think the tomb was new. I simply say, I'm kind of surprised. It looks to me like it might fit. And I've always thought it's just a legendary development. So it might be a legendary development, but oddly enough, it sort of fits. But beyond that, all you have are question marks. So if you think that a member of the Sanhedrin buried Jesus, you don't know it's because he had some special motive or was in charge of the burial detail. You don't know if he was in charge of other people who were crucified. What about the two thieves that are there in Mark? What happened to them? Are they in a separate tomb? Are they, or do they have family that, and Jesus just doesn't have any family or anybody to claim his body? You could just ask all these questions and you never get anywhere.
Right.
So I do have a whole chapter on Joseph as I may have said. And the conclusion is that it's likely historical. But I also say this at some point. I say the arguments on both sides aren't conclusive. There's no slam dunk here where you just say, oh, yeah, okay. Anyone would be a moron to think anything else. And that at the end of the day, your judgment about this sort of passage will be influenced by how you interpret the rest of the Gospels. That is, if you think there are a lot of memories there, right, for however they got there, then that ups the odds, right, or makes it makes you more open to the possibility that there's an historical memory here. But if you tend to think that the Gospels are mostly fictitious, and that the traditions in them are, bereft mostly of memory, then you'll tend to see the arguments from a different point of view. So your starting point matters a lot, and people often forget that. My starting point is weird. A lot of people think I'm way too conservative. A lot of people think I'm way too liberal and skeptical. In fact, I just saw a book review yesterday that called me a skeptic. And
Where?
Catholic Biblical Quarterly. And it lumps me in with, I think I'll find this. I'll bet I can find this thing.
They called you a skeptic?
Yeah, it's a really interesting sentence.
Well, I mean, when you're not aligning up with the magisterium, that might be why. If they're saying, if they take a stance, right?
I could find, just 1 second here. Sorry to take your time, but this really dumbfounded me. Anyway, I'm a skeptic in the same camp as Bart Ehrman, John Dominic Crossan.
Oh, wow.
And
I don't
Maurice
get that.
Casey, and I think maybe Bishop Spong or something like that. And I thought, wow, what a bad reader.
Yeah, because I didn't feel that way.
I'm not going to find it. But the point is that I see fictitious elements in the Gospels. I don't think you can prove Jesus rose from the dead and so on. I guess that makes me a skeptic. But I think I'm rather conservative. In fact, I say in the book, at one point, I say, golly, it struck me at some point, golly, this is kind of embarrassing. Most of my conclusions are, I think I called it embarrassingly antediluvian,
Well, I think, if I must say, as someone who is a skeptic and is like most of the works that I came from an apologist background. I was going to a Carolina Bible College, and they changed the name to Carolina College of Biblical Studies, a small little Baptist type college, nothing fancy. Was going to go to seminary and didn't go down that path because I had changed my mind so much that I was worried about if I came in as this and let's say I was Baptist. Oh no. Calvinism had convinced me at some point, right? Within the Protestant bubble, you don't really realize the traditions that go before that, by the way, and how that might be like a brain changer when you start looking into it. But I was in the Presbyterian PCA church. I got excommunicated because I
didn't know we did that anymore. Wow.
Well, this is the PCA, so it's probably
PCA, not USA. Okay.
Yeah, I got excommunicated, and I came to a full preterist position because I was trying to reconcile the parousia, and I said the Lord did come back. He came back in a way that maybe we don't understand it. And so I tried to reconcile, and cognitive dissonance, I think, kicked in. But anyway, I did what I did. They kicked me because I was talking to other members of the church. They had a 5-man council that told me just remain silent and listen to what we have to say. I couldn't debate with them. So I'm listening to these guys bash me. Long story short, I came from that background and then read a lot of skeptical stuff, like people who are like you're talking about with John Dominic Crossing and others that are far more skeptical that you'd be like, they go way too far. And after reading your book, I want to say this about the book. You have very clear, concise, skeptical approaches, but still draw your own conclusions for whatever your subjective reasons. You might say this mountain of other stuff gives me reason to take a position on this, but I don't know the answer as a fact. This is something I do. I felt you were pretty conservative in many ways too, though. Like on the Mary thing, we'll get to Mary too. This is but it's wonderful, to exercise our thinking on it. Anyway, I just want you to know, I call bunk on their conclusion. I don't think you come across any way like these other guys, but you're very honest about what we can know and what we can't know, and you're very cautious about that. It's at the end of the day, like you said in the previous video, you had an experience ultimately, when it comes to the faith, it's faith. It's your experience with you and what you think best fits this data in the text, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh my.
Am I onto something here? Like,
so I take experience seriously, but I don't know what to do with the word faith. I don't actually use it.
Okay.
So, and my idea of revelation is also exceedingly bizarre. So I believe that all facts are revelation, and the entire world is revelation. Everything is revelation. So when you're trying to figure out something, the truth about God, the truth about Jesus, the truth about anything, you need to operate with all the facts of the universe. Now, of course, that makes it impossible to do anything. But I don't know how, for example, to take the New Testament and say, well, it's special revelation. I just don't know how to do that, because I have to approach it as an historian. I know modern psychology. I know the history of biblical criticism. I know comparative religion. I know all these things, and how I can think about whatever is in there without also going outside the text and drawing the lines to everything else, I don't know. So maybe I could say, yeah, of course there's a subjective element to this, but I guess I don't like the way Christians often use faith. It just seems to me to be an epistemological bluff, and it's an excuse for not thinking. And you can have faith in anything. You can have faith in Joseph Smith. You can have faith in Muhammad. You could have faith in Krishna. And while I, on a personal level, will respect that, as an intellectual, I want to investigate and find out whether you're right or what the degree of truth is to what the heck you're saying. So I don't like separating religion behind walls and saying, here's my room, this is my faith, the rest of the world is outside. I don't like that at all.
Okay. Interesting. You got me one pro, but yeah, this is interesting. There's a lot biblically, I guess, when I say, let me define what I mean by faith, is that there are certain texts that we can't know the answer to. We don't have sufficient evidence to say, like, I can be conclusive, this is dogmatic, like, this is what it says. And in those places, I could tell it felt like you were using certain methodology that were historical. And let's just say you do lean, as I could read in the book, more that there's history here than there's not, at least memory.
Yeah, but you see, that's not just because I'm working with the Bible. It's not just because I'm a historian. It also involves my so-called worldview.
Right.
It also involves my taking seriously a field that many people don't take seriously, namely parapsychology. I think the parapsychological investigators, whatever their own conclusions, have collected all sorts of data that is fascinating. First-person data, first-person stories. And my time with that literature changes how I look at the biblical literature.
Right. Thank you.
It changes my view, for example, of miracles. I think the discussion of miracles in the modern world, going back to the Enlightenment, is very parochial and is still the case today. I think a lot of things people call miracles are actually fairly commonplace. They cross religious lines. They exist in secular contexts. And I don't think theologians have paid any attention to the real facts when it comes to debating the issue of miracles.
Thank you.
Forgive us. We are following the body of our Lord.
All are welcome. But come, the Sabbath is approaching.